A few years ago, I gave my wife for Christmas one of those DNA genealogy tests. And she was okay with that as long as I guaranteed that Irish would show up on that. So I paid them a little bit, throw someone else's. No, I didn't. Fortunately, it showed up. That's all I got to say. You know, that was part of the deal. And the company also gives you access to a database that could connect you with those who share DNA markers and heritage type things. It's all kinds of it's kind of fascinating. I think it's kind of fun it would be kind of fun, wouldn't it, to find out you were related to someone famous. Not maybe so much infamous, but famous, right? And my wife found out, and I don't remember if it was through that or a lot of work her sister, I think, was doing in genealogies, but she found out that she was related to someone who was burned as a witch in Salem. Which might explain why she twitches her nose a lot. That's all I'm saying. In October, she and I and my son Joshua, his wife Janice, went to Salem. October's nuts to go to Salem. But we weren't going there for Halloween things. We were going to the Peabody Essex Museum, which is a wonderful museum in Salem. And sure enough, there was this official document that they have on site there of listing the names of those involved in the witch trials, and there's the name, that she's related to. Which is kind of neat. Now, of course, you don't want to find out that you're the third cousin of Jeffrey Dahmer or something, right? Yeah, it's like that's crazy. But and that certainly wouldn't be something you bring up at a Christmas party, right? But we do look for cool people, that famous people maybe that we could be related to. We're looking for good things, right, when we do that. Now, as we've said from the very beginning of this series, by the way, this is most of the time we're celebrating Advent, right? Advent's not Christmas, but most of the time we celebrate Christmas all through Advent. This is truly an Advent series, probably maybe the first one I've ever done. Most of our Christmas songs are not Advent songs. O come, Emmanuel is. Come thou long expected Jesus, that's an Advent song. There may be another one. All the rest are Christmas. Right? We're getting there, right? We're moving towards Christmas. Right? But when Matthew, sat down to give his account of the life of Jesus, instead of beginning with the story about the baby in Bethlehem and an angel and all those other cool things that we find in the Gospel of Luke, we don't find any of that in Mark or John, but in Luke, Matthew does something different. He begins by doing a little research. And he begins with the genealogy of Jesus, which is why we're calling this kind of an unexpected Christmas. And today's subtitle is going to be The Label Maker. All right, so I want you to just remember that in a few moments. Now, Matthew's goal in doing this genealogy was actually to address his Jewish audience. He had to first off make sure they understood Jesus was really, really, really Jewish, which is why he begins with Abraham, father of the Jewish nation. But if he's going to help people understand that Jesus was the Christ, the Messiah, he also has to be related to King David, because everybody knew the Messiah comes from the line of King David. And so he sets up this genealogy to set out right from the beginning, Jesus is the right stuff to be the Messiah. But he does something else in the genealogy. He kind of along the way includes some characters, some people in that lineage that have some kind of like R-rated stories in their life that we've been looking at, right? And what we've learned here is that the reason he would do that is not only that they're part of the story, but they are actually the point of the story of Jesus coming. Matthew is writing this to a very, very religious group in a very, very religious environment. And they believed that in order to have access to God, You came to God based on the things you did and did not do in your life. In fact, all world religions do that in some form. They embrace this approach to God or whatever it is I'm trying to reach, right? But a lot of folks, here's the truth. I find that there's been a lot of folks in the Christian church that actually believe this. And part of my point right here is to get you to stop believing something and believe something else. And that's why we're going through some of this, right? That we come to God sometimes this approach that says, God, I want you to bless my babies, bless my families, I need you to bless my business. And the reason that, God, you should take me seriously is because here are all the good things I've done. And here are some of the bad things I've avoided. And here are some of the things I've quit doing. And here are some of the things I've never done. And I know I'm not as good as some people, but boy, I'm better than a lot. Right? And generally speaking, that's our platform that we use to try to get to God. It's the good things I've done, the bad things I've avoided, and Matthew is writing to an audience, right? And many people in his culture, and I believe many people in our culture, right, that approach God based on how good I am. That my ability to live a consistently, not perfect, but good life. And if you approach that way, at some point you're going to realize, if that's my platform, it's never going to be good enough. You're always going to wonder, have I had this? Is the scales tipped the right way? You know, there's always a question mark. And I find that when I ask people, if you died today and God said, why should I let you into heaven? And your answer is, well, I've tried to do my best. This is you. All right? That's the approach. I tried to be good enough to get to heaven. You earned it. You did it. The truth is, what you don't realize you're saying in that statement is, and I didn't need Jesus to do anything for me. I've been good. So Matthew knows he's about to launch into the greatest story ever told. It's a story where God is going to reiterate something that has been true, by the way, all along. That humanity has been invited to approach God on a relational level, not on a works level. A relational level. And the foundation of that relationship is not what I've done or what I haven't done. The foundation of that relationship is what God has done on behalf of us spiritually through his Son, Jesus Christ. So as Matthew traces the lineage of Jesus, he underscores the fact that all along, not just the New Testament, but all along, God has distributed his grace and his mercy to people who have not deserved it. And the reason that they're a part of the story is that they're the point of the story. And the reason that you're a part of the story is because you are the point of the story. Not because of what you've done, right? But with what Jesus has done. And that is the point of Christmas. So again, here's how Matthew begins his gospel, Matthew 1:1. A record of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. There he is established. He's Jewish. And then he begins. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac the father of Jacob. Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. We looked at that story last week with Judah and Tamar. You can go online, and if you missed that and want to see that, listen to that. It's online on our website, mynbc.life. And then he continues. Judah, the father of Perez. Zerah, the mother, who was Tamar. Again, that was from last week. Perez, the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. And Ram, isn't that like, isn't that a great name? Ram, the father of Abinadab. the father of Nation, the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz. Isn't this like real Christmassy, right? Father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Now, for the Jewish people, when they heard the name Rahab, they go, ooh. Because Rahab had a label. Rahab had a label, or nickname. Okay? It's kind of unusual. Throughout the Bible, by the way, people have labels. They have nicknames. See, let's just take a test here for a moment. Fill in the blanks here, all right? If you're online, write this in the chat right now, right? John the Baptist. Baptist is not his last name, by the way. Baptist is baptizer, John the Baptizer, right? Here's a more difficult one. This is going to be tough. Uriah the Hittite. Wow. That was a tougher one. You know, and then think about history. Alexander the Great, right? Attila the Wow, you put Attila the Hun. You got these are really good. Conan the Barbarian. I'm not sure he's quite in that real story there, but Buffy the Wow, you got Vampire Slayer. And now this is going to determine your real spiritual life if you get this one. Jabba the Hutt. Whoa, my word. You guys are so good, right? Anyway, throughout history or fiction, right? It's not uncommon for people to have a word associated with their name to describe them. And unfortunately for Rahab, especially if you grew up in the world of King James, she was known as Rahab the harlot. Rahab the harlot. Now that creates tension in the genealogy of Jesus, wouldn't it? All right? Rahab the harlot. And Rahab, as we're going to discover, wasn't even Jewish. She was a Canaanite. She was like the enemy. Right? She was of that group of people that God sent Israel into to move them out so that they could go and take the land, the promised land, which eventually would become the kingdom that King David ruled. And right in the middle of the story of Jesus, as we launch into the Christmas story, there is Rahab the harlot. And it creates tension in the story. Because God's law, by the way, was pretty clear. You know, especially when God gave the law to Moses, he said, you can't have any of this in your midst. No harlots in the midst, right? And there's some harsh punishment for women who played the harlot. That's the phrase that got used, right? Played the harlot. And we get a harlot right in the middle of the setup for the Christmas story, and she's known as Rahab the harlot. And again, Matthew could have skipped over her, but he didn't. Why? Because she's a part of the story, and she's the point of the story. So her story is found in Joshua chapter 2. Let me just give you the background, tell you the story for a moment. Moses, brings the people out of Egypt, and they wander in the wilderness for 40 years, all of that. But now is the time where they're going to cross the Jordan to go into the promised land. But it's not Moses that's going to lead them. We get upset sometimes a little bit with God. Can I say that? Moses was not allowed to go into the promised land. We go, you've got to be kidding me. After all that he had to put up with and go through and everything else, you're not going to... Folks, we get the wrong perspective. Moses did go into the promised land, much better than the one that the Israelites are going into. Can we say that? Right? So there's a change, a transition in leadership. And after Moses, because he dies, and Joshua now is the leader of Israel, the leader of the Jewish people. Right? He takes over for Moses. And they cross the Jordan, and they're going to take these cities, and there's a city named Jericho. Maybe you've heard about that. There's some songs written about the walls of Jericho, and it's a great story. You should just read the first few chapters of Joshua in the Old Testament, because it is an incredibly awesome, powerful, weird story of how Israel takes Jericho. But what Joshua does is he sends 2 spies into the land first, just to kind of scope it out. And as they're in there, they end up staying. I don't know how all of this happened. But they knock on the door of Rahab, and they're going to kind of stay there while they're scoping the land. Maybe she had some rooms for rent. I don't know. But the people find out, the king finds out of Jericho, that, hey, there are some Israelites snooping around. And you know what? Somebody saw them over at Rahab's. So they go and check it out. And what Rahab does is she hides the two spies on the roof. Her home, whatever, was actually on the walls. Jericho had a huge wall, protective wall around it. Okay? And at nighttime, they shut the gates. So what happened is she hid them. The soldiers came, and Rahab says, you know, they were here. But right before dusk, they left through the gate right before it closed. As a matter of fact, if you hurry, you might be able to catch them. And they go off on the wild goose chase. Rahab now goes upstairs and has a conversation with these two Hebrew spies, which is where we're going to pick up the text. This is from Joshua chapter 2, verse 8. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up to the roof, and she said to them, I know that the Lord has given this land to you. Can you leave that verse up there for a moment? Do you see the word Lord? It's all capitalized. In the translation in this Hebrew for God, that's translated for us, the word Lord here, it's the Hebrew word that is actually very rarely used for God because it was such a special word. And some Jewish leaders, some Jewish people would not speak this name out loud. It was only written. It is the most sacred name of God. It literally means the existing one. I am. The name above all names. And she tells the spies, you know what? We've heard the stories, and people here in Jericho, man, we are trembling, melting in fear of you. This is what she says in verse 11. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Two different words she uses for God. The great existing one, who is the ruler, literally, it's what she says. And we believe that is the God of heaven and earth. So basically she says this, I believe in spite of what I've been taught, I believe in spite of what I've seen, I believe that your God, whoever your God is the God who reigns and rules over my household gods, over the Canaanite gods, over anything I've known about God before this time. So there is this amazing sense of faith just based on what she's heard about God. Very little content, amazing amount of faith. So here's the thing, she says. So, because I've saved your life, I want you to save me and my families. And the plan is developed. Right? Here's the plan. Right? The plan is, when we come to take Jericho, you tie a red rope, hang it out your window, and everybody in Israel will know you're protected. But everybody's got to be in here. If your family starts wandering around the city, all bets are off. But if everybody in here, and we will protect you, and we will save you. And that's exactly what happens. Okay? The rest of the story, wonderful and crazy as it is, I'm not going to go into, but just so you know, Israel conquers Jericho, but saves Rahab and her family because she does exactly what she was told. Right? And so now you go ahead a few chapters, Joshua 6, and it says this, But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho. And I love the last phrase of that verse, okay, because this puts the story in as kind of a spot of history. All right, this is they lived happily ever after type phrase. Listen to the last phrase of that verse. And she lives among the Israelites to this day. Okay? Isn't that great? This is a picture of something that was still foreign, by the way, to the Israelites' way of thinking. that God is a God of mercy and a God of grace who would even spare a foreigner, an outsider, an enemy. Now, what the Bible doesn't tell us is that one day, I don't know how many years passed through, right? But one day, Rahab is doing her chores. She's not, I guarantee you, she's not being the harlot, playing the harlot in Israel, right? She's doing her chores, doing her thing, and as the nation of Israel continues to move through the land, and a man named Salmon walks up to her one day and says, "Hey, you want to go get a cup of coffee?" Or something like that, right? And then they have dinner, and one thing leads to another, and they fall in love, and Salmon says, "Hey, I would like to marry you." And this Jewish man marries this Canaanite woman, and they have a little baby, and they say, "Let's name him Boaz." And Boaz grows up, and when he's older, is introduced to a young woman named Ruth. There's an entire book in the Bible about her. And they have a baby. And Boaz and Ruth's great-grandson is actually King David because of them being together. And you see, Matthew pauses and brings all of that memory to his Jewish readers because they all knew the story. The story of Rahab illustrates the entire story and message of Jesus. Here's an outsider, an enemy, a lawbreaker in a time when life was ruled by the law. And even though she's guilty because of her lifestyle, and even though she's an outsider because of where she was born, my grace, my love, my mercy, they're all big enough and broad enough to save her life. Not only that, but to even incorporate her into the lineage of Jesus the Christ. Absolutely incredible. It's the perfect illustration. But you know what? I don't think her story is so far away from our story. Because just as she had a label, Rahab the harlot, I think if I was able to peel back your heart and see your thoughts and study your behavior, your private behavior and your public behavior and your past behavior and the things about you that you don't want anybody to know, I think the truth is probably all of us have a label, right? Some of you may have had labels just recently discovered and it's something you're ashamed of. Some of you have labels that you've tried to distance yourself from, and every once in a while you meet people from the past and they say, "Oh yeah, I remember that," and you remember that in their minds you have a label. When I was in elementary school, I played Little League Baseball. My dad coached Little League Baseball and got me involved in it, and I couldn't care less about it, but I started as a bat boy. Do they still have bat boys in Little League Baseball? That was like you were really young, too young to play, but when the batter swung and left the bat, you ran up and got it out of the way so that nobody would trip over it, or that was a bat boy. So I started that way, and then I was old enough to be on a team. I didn't play a lot. I was just really young and really, really small. I know it's hard for you to imagine that, but it was just like, But one day, and I won't, in some very embarrassing details that I won't go into, with my soccer mom, only Little League, we were getting destroyed by this team, just absolutely destroyed, and so I got put in because it didn't matter, right? And I was so small at the plate, and I was bending down real low. I was walked. In other words, pitcher threw 4 balls, and I got to go to first base. Okay? Now, I am nervous as all get out. I've never been in this position before, right? Nervous as all get out. Our coach would always be on third base, so he could give the signals as whether or not to steal. This is the one time it's okay to steal. Steal second base. And I looked, I got the signal, and the pitcher winds up, and I run. Except he actually didn't give the signal. I only thought he did. The other problem was we actually already had a person on second base. If you don't know baseball, that was pretty bad, right? And so began my incredible baseball career, right? Fast forward, where now I'm probably in my 30s, and I go to a high school reunion. You can see where this is going. And I meet somebody that was on the team, and he goes, "Oh, I remember. You're the guy that tried to steal second base that was already had a person on it." All right. You get the point? There's a label in that guy's mind, right? And for some of you, right, you have a label maybe imposed on you because something that you embarrassed about or even ashamed of, or you have a label in your mind for your ex-husband or your ex-wife, and you so wish you could go back and undo what you've done, but you can't undo it. Some of you have labels because of secrets that you hold that you don't want anybody to know. Some of you have labels simply because of habits. But as easy as it is to look at someone like Rahab the harlot and go, "Oh, wow, really? That's tough," you know. The truth is, in some ways, her story is our story. Because like Rahab, when you think about approaching God, as soon as you start to step up to God, "God, I'm going to pray, and here's what I want you to do for me, and here's why," and maybe the first thing that comes to your mind is a label. And suddenly you back off and you realize there's no reason for God to take me seriously. There's no reason for me to try to be a part of a church community. There's no point in me trying to even engage in spiritual activity because I have a label. And it's a secret label, but it's a label that's true nonetheless. I actually, there's a list of labels, but maybe one of these describes you. Carrie the coveter, Gloria the greedy, Gary the glutton, Larry the luster, Cheryl the cheater, James the jerk. I'm just a jerk, and everybody knows I'm a jerk, right? Sam the swindler, Adam the addict, Barry the abuser, Jenny the jealous, Faith the unfaithful. And you know what I think? I'm just guessing here. I'm guessing that Matthew, through this whole genealogy, he gets to the whole Boaz and Salmon and Rahab thing, and again, he just has to throw her name in there, Rahab the harlot, and it's because Matthew knew he had a label as well. He is Matthew the tax collector. And he remembers that moment when Jesus called him. And when Jesus called him, guess where he was? In the tax collecting booth, right? Right there. And you know what the good news is? Jesus didn't look at Matthew, the tax collector, and say, "Matthew, once you quit being a tax collector, join me. Matthew, I want you to lay it down and promise you'll never do it again. And once you've repented of your tax collecting, I want you to follow me. Matthew, once you get a different label, or you have a different reputation among the people, I want you to join me." No, Matthew remembers the day that when Jesus looked him right in the eye with his label, caught in the act, and said, "Matthew, I want you to follow me. Matthew, I want you to join me." And Matthew knows he's about to tell the story of Jesus who invited all kinds of people with all kinds of labels to follow and believe in him while they were still wearing their labels. Because his righteousness does not overshadow his mercy. Right? His holiness would never overshadow his grace. And his sense of forgiveness was broad enough to incorporate and encompass everybody, regardless of his or her label. So Rahab the harlot would be given the opportunity to become the great whatever grandmother of Jesus the Christ, which is the point of the story. Isn't that powerful? Isn't that a bit overwhelming, though? Does it move us? My agenda, really, for this is, throughout the whole Christmas series, is to move us to begin rethinking our approach to God. Because the message of Christmas is what God has done for you. And you couldn't do it for yourself. But you have been invited, while you're still wearing your label, you have been invited to lean into the God who has leaned into you. You have been invited to come to God during this Christmas season to say, I want to begin a relationship with you while I'm still wearing that crazy label that I would love to get rid of. And I would invite you into a relationship not based on what you have or haven't done, in spite of your label. I want to invite you into a relationship based purely on what Jesus came to do for you. And it's a relationship he wants, defined by grace, mercy, and forgiveness. So this is how we're going to end this. When you came in, you received this Christmas decoration. It's a decoration for a tree or a tag. It's a label. So let me ask you a question. Would you be honest enough in this moment to say, you know what, there are labels associated with my name. Some of them I've earned and deserve. There are things in my past that other people would look at my past who knew me back then and they would see this label, right? And I wish I could get rid of it, but it's the past, I can't change it. Or, George, if you knew what I do this weekend, what I do week in and week out, you know what, that nobody else knows about, yeah, there would be a label. If you knew the thoughts that run through my mind when I see certain people, if you could see the jealousy that runs through my heart when I'm around certain people, right? From God's perspective, there was probably a label associated with my name. So we're going to close the service. If you can agree with that you have a label you don't want and you know God does not want for you, I want you to take this. At home, you do the same thing. Right? And I want you to write something on here that represents that label. Now, you could simply write it out. That's okay. You could just put a letter on there that represents it. Or you could be so cryptic that nobody but you or God is going to understand what that would mean. Doesn't matter. Right? Don't put your name on it. Don't want that. This is just between you and God. And what we're going to do is right now, as we begin to close, what we're going to do is give it up. Give it all up to God's grace and mercy and forgiveness by coming forward and putting it on the tree that's over on your left. Right? It's God, I am handing over my past to you, my sin to you, my label or labels that aren't from you, and I am giving them up to you this Christmas. Okay? So, take a moment. I'm going to pray, and sometimes, someone's like, well, Bobby is up here praying, or I'm up here praying. What we want to have happen, if your heart leads you that, this is what you agree with that prayer. So you make that prayer your personal prayer. I'm going to make it personal to me, and if you're in agreement with that for your life, then you would basically say, yes, I'm praying that for you too. Heavenly Father, I believe your grace is more powerful than my label. I believe Christ died to pay for the sin that my labels may represent. And I believe you've offered me a new label: forgiven, accepted, loved. Teach me, Lord, to live my life in accordance with who you say I am. Amen.